Good evening, folks. Now, I've got a couple extras for you. Bonuses for tonight. Bonus 1 is discussion D, and the title is The Green Hour, Cannabis and the Aging Brain. Okay, so we're going to dig into how cannabis affects the aging brain. Okay, here we go. In the late hours of a winter evening, when the fluorescent lights of the nursing home hallway soften and the building exhales into its nightly quiet, I sometimes find myself sitting beside an older adult whose mind has begun to drift from the world we share. Their agitation rises like a tide, hands fidgeting, words looping, fear flickering behind the eyes. In these moments, the question of relief becomes urgent, almost sacred, and increasingly the answer families reach for is cannabis. It is a surprising turn in the long story of aging. Cannabis, once a symbol of counterculture youth, has become a balm sought by the old, not euphoria or rebellion, but for sleep, for pain, for the restless storms of dementia. The plant that once fueled college parties now sits in amber bottles on bedside tables in assisted living facilities. The aging brain, fragile and changing, has become cannabis's newest frontier. The endocannabinoid system, the brain's own internal network of cannabinoid receptors, changes with age. CB1 receptor thin out the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the very regions responsible for memory and executive function. Neuroinflammation simmers, sleep fragments, vascular resilience warns the older brain is not simply a younger brain with more years. It is a different landscape altogether, one where psychoactive substances behave unpredictably, like weather crossing a mountain range. And yet, in the altered terrain, cannabis sometimes works beautifully. I have seen a woman with advanced Alzheimer's, once tormented by sundowning, settle into a calmer rhythm after a low dose THC tincture. Her daughter described it as getting her mother back for an hour. I have watched a man with terminal cancer sleep through the night for the first time in weeks after a CBD forward formulation eased his neuropathic pain. These are not miracles, but they are miraculous. Small human shifts in suffering that matter deeply. Cannabis can soften agitation, reduce nighttime wandering, and ease the external distress that often accompanies cognitive decline. It can help older adults reclaim sleep, reduce reliance on sedating antipsychotics, and restore a measure of dignity in the face of relentless disease. In palliative care, where the goal is comfort rather than cure, these effects can feel like grace, but the story is not simple, and it is never one directional. The same THC that quiets agitation can slow processing speed and impair gait, dual tasking, increasing fall risks. The same CBD that soothes anxiety can interact with polypharmacy in unpredictable ways. Cannabis can precipitate delirium in frail older adults, destabilize blood pressure, and cloud the delicate cognitive balance that many elders fight to maintain in brains already navigating symptomatic losses, vascular compromise, and neurodegenerative change. Even small prohibitions can have outsized consequences. the paradox. In this, cannabis can both help and harm, often through the same mechanisms in modules. Neurotransmitters dampens inflammation, alters cerebral blood flow. These pathways can relieve suffering or reduce new vulnerabilities. The aging brain with its thinking reserves feels both effects more intensely. Families often ask me whether cannabis is safe for their aging parents. I tell them that safety is not a binary. It is a relationship between a substance, a body, and a moment in time. Cannabis is neither inherently benign or inherently dangerous. It is a tool, and like any tool, its value depends on how, when, and why it is used. What troubles me most is not cannabis itself, but the vacuum of guidance surrounding it. Older adults are using cannabis at the fastest growing rate of any age group. Yet our clinical frameworks lag decades behind. We have no standardized dosing for dementia, agitation, no consensus on formulation for frailty, no clear protocols for monitoring cognitive side effects. Long-term care facilities are left to improvise policies. Families navigate uh, dispensaries with the same uncertainty as choosing a wine for dinner party, except the stakes are immeasurably higher. Cannabis has become de facto geriatric medicine without the guardrails of geriatric science. And so we find ourselves in a liminal space, a plant with a real therapeutic potential, an aging population in need of relief, and a health system still catching up. The question is not whether cannabis belongs in the care of older adults. It already does. The question is how to use the aging brain's complexity. how's it, how to use it with intention, humanity, and respect for the aging brain's complexity. In the quiet of those winter evenings, when agitation softens and a patient's breathing steadies, I am reminded that medicine is often about navigating uncertainty with compassion. Cannabis is part of that navigation now. It asks us to balance relief with risk, hope with caution, innovation with wisdom. It asks us to see the aging brain not as a problem to be solved, but as a landscape to be tended carefully, uh, rever- reverently, and with an eye toward the whole person. The green hour is here. Our task is to meet it with clarity, science, and humanity. When the smell of cannabis enters the hallway, a narrative on policy and the aging brain. Okay, guys, here's the second half of D for you. In long term care policy, changes rarely arrive with fanfare. They, they seep in quietly, often through the lived experience of residents long before regulations take notice. Cannabis is not, cannabis is no exception. It began appearing in TLCs the way new cultural norms often do. The first as whispers among families, then as discreet tincture bottles tucked into bedside drawers, and finally as a question posed to administrators. Are we allowed to do this? The truth is that older adults have already answered that question for themselves. They are using cannabis for pain, sleep, anxiety, and dementia related agitation. They are using it because other medications have failed them or harmed them or numbed them. They are using it because suffering demands relief, and cannabis, rightly or wrongly, has become part of the vocabulary of comfort. But the aging brain is not a neutral canvas. It is a landscape shaped by frailty, vascular compromise, cognitive vulnerability, and polypharmacy. And when cannabis enters that landscape, policy must follow. The first policy implication: science is no longer neutral. For years, TLC facilities relied on a kind of strategic ambiguity. Federal law said one thing, state law said another, and the safest administrative stance was to prohibit cannabis entirely. But prohibition didn't stop use, it simply pushed it underground. Residents used cannabis without documentation, without monitoring, without interaction checks. And without any of the safeguards we apply to other psychoactive substances. In the silence, risk grew. A resident with mild dementia began using high THC edibles bought in by her son. Her agitation improved, but her gait worsened. She fell twice in a month. Staff didn't know she was using cannabis. The son didn't know the dose was too high. The facility didn't know it needed a policy. This is what silence produces, harm that no one can trace. Policy implication: LTC facilities must move from prohibition to governance, not because cannabis is inherently safe, but because its presence is now inevitable. The second implication: cannabis must be treated like a geriatric medication. The aging brain metabolizes THC and CBD differently. Frailty alters clearance. Dementia amplifies vulnerability. Polypharmacy multiplies interactions. Yet, cannabis often enters LTCs as if it were a benign supplement, untracked, unreviewed, uncontrolled, unmonitored. This is a clinical mismatch with real consequences. A facility would never allow in an uncontrolled benzodiazepine, opioid, or antipsychotic, but cannabis, another psychoactive agent capable of sedation, confusion, osteoarthritis, and behavioral change, has slipped through the cracks of our regulatory immigration policy implication. Cannabis requires the same rigor as any high risk psychoactive. That means documented uh, indication, starting dose, and treated plan. Pharmacy review, scheduled assessment for cognition falls, and behavior criteria for discontinuation. This is not about restricting access, it is about respecting the aging brain. The third implication, staff needed clarity, not moral distress. Nurses and aides are already navigating cannabis use informally. They see tinctures on nightstands. They smell edibles in residents' rooms. They witness behavioral changes they cannot explain, and they are left to wonder, am I supposed to chart this? Am I liable? Am I allowed to help? Policy implication, facilities must define staff roles explicitly. A humane, realistic policy might say staff may verify and document cannabis use. Staff may not recommend dose or dispense cannabis. Residents or families retain responsibility for administration. Combustible and vaping forms are prohibited in conjugate settings. This protects staff, respects resident autonomy, and keeps cannabis within a marginable operational frame. The fourth implication, ethics must be built in from the start. Cannabis in LTCs is not just a clinical issue, it's an ethical one. A resident with advanced dementia cannot meaningfully meaningfully consent to cannabis. A family may request it to ease agitation or to make caregiving easier, or out of desperation, a facility may see cannabis as a way to reduce antipsychotic use, or more troubling troubling more troubling as a way to reduce staffing strain. Policy implication: cannabis must never become a tool of convenience. A strong policy includes tiered consent frameworks, ethics review for higher risk cases, documentation that the goal is symptom relief, not behavioral control, safeguards against coercion or quiet chemical restraint. This is why your palliative lens is essential. Cannabis must serve the residents' comfort, not the system's efficiency. The fifth implication: federal clarity will force TLCs to act. As federal regulators move toward allowing legal state legal medical cannabis in TLCs under defined conditions, facilities will no longer be able to hide behind federal prohibition. The question will shift from can we allow cannabis to how will we allow cannabis safely. Policy implication: LTC systems need model policies, not now, not later. The narrative truth beneath all of this: cannabis is not a miracle. It is not a menace. It is a substance with the power to ease suffering, and the power to cause harm in long-term care where vulnerability is the norm and comfort is the goal. Both powers matter. Policy is how we honor that complexity. Policy is how we protect residents from harm without denying them relief. Policy is how we support staff without burdening them. Policy is how we bring cannabis out of the shadows and into the realm of ethical, transparent care. The smell of cannabis in the hallways in the hallway is no longer a novelty. It is a signal. It tells us that the culture of aging is changing and our policies must change with it. Carefully, deliberately, and always with the aging brain at the center. Okay, guys, that is your shows for tonight. I will see everybody tomorrow for shows. For now, Gator Wellness, take care, folks.